toward the one, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the messenger, the spirit of guidance. Welcome to this sixth and final class in this series on the imaginal faculty of the soul. So we're going to start by talking about a question that one of our participants sent in, which is a very good question. And the question is, what's the difference between thinking and the imaginal faculty? Well, right now, each of you is probably thinking about your own answer to that. So we're going to do a little bit of exploring about what thinking is about and how it relates to the imaginal faculty and how it differs from it. Most of us probably have a stream of thoughts going on nearly all the time during our waking hours. And that stream can be about thinking about what we're going to be doing during the day, remembering something that happened before, anticipating something that's upcoming. And then as the day goes along, it can be about reactions, thoughts in response to situations that happen and circumstances, whether good or bad. So evaluating them, I really like this, I don't like that, I wish this, I don't wish that, and so on. But our usual way of thinking, which is so much a part of our usual sense of self, is actually an obstacle that keeps us from experiencing what we're aiming at in our process of awakening, which is a realization, as we've talked about, of the multidimensional reality of who we are and our interconnectedness with everything that we're experiencing. So the usual thought processes are dualistic in nature. We are perceiving ourselves as separated from what we're experiencing, and we're thinking about what we're experiencing. So that's a dualism right there. Even if we're just all by ourselves and we're thinking about an inner experience in meditation, if we're thinking about it, then we're separated from the actual experience. And we're having a concept about the experience, but we're not actually being present. So many of you are familiar with the idea of working with presence, which in its most basic level, we think of as just being aware. Our awareness is just focused on what's going on right now and not occupied with things apart from that, either spatially or temporally. And that's certainly an essential ingredient to presence. But as we've been exploring in this series and in previous series, there's a deeper aspect to presence. We've talked about tawil, experiencing the underlying reality behind that which appears in something. We've talked about what we call relational unity, which is a way of interconnecting, that we're not separated and we still have our sense of identity. So these are ways in which we can be present that are much more permeable, that are allowing a circulation. And we can be present without having a running commentary in our minds about what's going on, about what we're experiencing.
My favorite example of that is being in nature, where you seem to be carried by the patterns around you, by the wind blowing, and you're feeling a part of a fabric of everything. So there are these moments, and many of us also find times when we can get into a state like that, whether it be through our listening to music, making music, creating art, a lot of the imaginal activities, you might say, using the imagination, where we kind of reach up a little bit into that place and then finally find a multidimensionality is one word that Mazarbash just used, so that we're sensing being a part of all of it, but still having our own contribution to it.
Now, what are some obstacles that our usual way of thinking brings about? Well, one we've talked about in the past of the allegory of the soul. It's like our story through this life and even beyond this life that's always being added to. But many times, the world that we live in is a construct. It's an artificial limitation based on a worldview that has built into it separation, that has built into it certain patterns of thought. And these patterns of thought can be part of our conditioning, things that are a result of how we were brought up in our childhood, things that we were told by others, things that we told ourselves that contribute towards our self-image. And we take our self-image as being the reality. So some people have a self-image, well, I'm not worthwhile, I'm such and such, somehow there's something wrong with me. And that's taken to be a reality because it's been reinforced so many times. So I'd like to do a little segue. I'm sure all of us use Google to search for things. But what you may not be aware of when you use that or any other search engine, particularly if you're allowing it to store a history of previous searches, it's got a predictable prediction algorithm built into it. And so it's going to filter the results. So when you Google something, it might say there's 1 million hits. Well, you can't look at 1 million different things. So it's going to order them into the ones that Google thinks are most relevant to you. And the ones that are going to tend to come up on the first page or two are going to be the ones that are most similar to the kinds of things you've been looking for in the past. So if you've been looking for ideas that are consistent with the way you view something, it could be almost any issue, gradually you're going to get hits from other sites where those ideas are reinforced. And the more that that happens, the more that you can become convinced, well, that is real. Look, this is what everyone is saying. Most people are saying this, so it must be the way that it is. So the point I'm making here is we construct, without intending to, an artificial allegory of our soul, which we think of as the reality of our being, and we filter out things that don't fit in with that or push them away and move towards and reinforce people with similar ideas, exploring things that we read that are consistent with what we believe in. And it's very easy to end up with a narrower and narrower perception of reality as opposed to what we're aiming for in spirituality of awakening to a much vaster notion and reality of who we are.
Why don't you tell us how that's different than that, than experiences that we may have had where now we find things are announcing themselves to us, things seem to be connected more with us, that kind of thinking.
Okay, well, that's a great question. So there's some kinds of, this whole series has been about our way of relating to whatever it is that we're experiencing. So the way of relating that Ravani Ra is talking about are ways of relating that open up things more. We've talked before about everything being like a hotspot or a portal to the sacred if we can relate to it in the proper way. And it opens us up and it opens the world that we're in to a much richer state of being. So the more that that happens, gradually we come to identify with that, and that becomes more the base station of our being instead of the usual separated state. In contrast to that, if we engage in a reactive way of experiencing our circumstances, the more that that happens, the more that we move in the opposite direction. So we're wanting to foster experiences that result in that opening. And that can happen in many ways, like Ravani Ra mentioned, some through music, through art. It could be reading something inspiring, poetry. I get inspired reading things in science that are just really exciting. And it certainly also can be about our inner experiences in meditation. And this has to do with the way that we relate to our practices. So the very same practice for two different people can either result in more limitation, although that's certainly not the intention of the practice. But if the practice just becomes repetition and there's not any juice to it, and it's just thought, okay, I'm just grinding my way through so many repetitions of this, nothing useful is going to come from that. And on the other hand, if we relate to practices in the way that we tried to demonstrate many, many times throughout all the different series, where we feel that not only is the practice changing us each time, but we're changing the practice by how the light that comes from that practice has been returned from us. And so it's a living, evolving experience instead of just something static. So we always have the capability, and this relates to the imaginal faculty, of making that shift from the previous conditioned way of thought and experience that brings about constriction to one that brings about opening and further growth.
That's good.
Okay, so something I want to mention, and this is something that normally we wouldn't think about. So let's say you've been feeling pretty good and you're around some people and they're not really doing anything in particular, but all of a sudden you get a bunch of thoughts that are making you feel angry or very sad or agitated or whatever. Well, the way our brains are wired is that we like for things to make sense. You know, we'd like for the world to make sense. And our brain is very good at making those neuronal connections to find associations. So our brain is going to generate some reason why we must be feeling the way that we're feeling. And it's very easy to come up with it. So let's say you start to feel angry out of the blue. Well, I think we can all find good reasons to be angry about several things these days. It's not hard. It's not a short list. And there we go. And now we've added to that constricted story, well, by gosh, we've got good reason to be angry, and everyone should be angry because look at such and such, when in actuality what's happened is, because perhaps we, like many people on the spiritual journey, are very sensitive people. And sometimes many people attracted to spirituality are overly sensitive. And what does that mean? It means that they very easily are affected by impressions from other people, good or bad. And so many times they have a hard time in life because there's a lot of negativity going around. So one important thing to develop in the spiritual process of awakening is the capacity to filter out unwanted impressions and recognize when they come that they're not ours. Just like if you walked into a room and you're sitting there and you don't see any speakers, but let's say they're built into the wall, they're hidden, and all of a sudden this horrible music starts playing. Well, you're not likely to think that that music is you, but you sure don't like it, and you'd like to change the channel. So we have the capacity of changing the channel of what goes through our psyche, our consciousness, instead of just taking it in and assuming it's a part of who we are. So working with the imaginal faculty involves being able to move in a direction that we have an intention for that's going to lead to opening, recognizing when we're in a state that's not one of interconnectedness, it's not one of openness, it's not one that really fosters growth, and being able to shift away from that and realize and remember that that's not who we are, even though temporarily that's our experience. So this is real important. It sounds kind of trite to say, we are not what we are experiencing. And we're not the sum total of everything that we have experienced. That's not who we are. That's kind of the map or topography of our journey, is where we've been, but that's not who we are. What's important is the way that we navigate on our pathway through life, both externally and internally.
So I'd just like to reiterate part of what you just said that was very, very strong here, and I think it's very good, is that those things that are going through our mind are not who we are. Those things that we're identifying as ourselves is not really who we are either. And I wanted to challenge you. So can you give us something in particular about when we think that other people's input is really our own, our feelings are really our own? Is there something that we can do if we have that happening?
Well, yeah. Well, one, some of you may be familiar with the story of, I think it was Ramana Maharshi, who, and I hope I have the right sage here, that when he was a young man, he was very afraid of dying. So he decided to face his fear. So he laid out on the ground and he thought, you know, if I lost my leg, I'd still be me. I'm not my leg. I'm not my arms. And he kind of went through his body. So I'm not any of one of these parts of my body. And then he took a look at his thought processes and realized that thoughts come and go. And so he realized, well, I'm not any one of these thoughts. For one thing, when I go to sleep at night, I'm not thinking in deep sleep. But when I wake up the next morning, I'm still here. I didn't disappear because I'm not thinking about myself and keeping that structure going. And he went through all the things that he was not, and then he discovered who he is. Well, that's kind of a spiritual way of doing that. But the other way is just to realize that Hazrat Khan there's a wonderful book on healing, and a section of that's called Healing in the Mind World. And he was so far ahead of his time. This was written in the early 1920s. I mean, it's lectures that he gave. And he talked about what he called, they're like highways in the mind. And they're like, and some of them are like thoroughfares. They've been gone down so many times. It's just like there's a momentum when thoughts come on board just to go down that pathway. And it's the familiar ones, and sometimes they're negative ones and so on. But actually, process of awakening and mastery is a part of that, is being able to shift away from those familiar highways and bring out new ones. And in what we know about the brain now, you're actually making new connections of the neurons in the brain. You're creating new circuitry. So just because this is the tendency for the mind to go down this way, and we all have these tendencies to go down familiar patterns of reaction, analysis, interpretation, and so on, and like I said, filter out things that don't go with that, but we don't have to keep doing that. And we talked about the process of awakening. One very essential step is being able to release our assumptions about how we think that things are. And we've talked about fana, that shattering process, that letting go, and being in that in-between state where things are reorganized, but they're cloudy. We don't know what's coming from it, but it's a necessary state to go through in order for something to emerge that is a higher state of being than where we were before. So my short answer to your question is recognizing when we're stuck in those for whatever reason, and realizing that A is not who we are, and B is not how we want to be and what we're seeking to become, and engaging in a process that helps us shift away from that. And so if it's a inner experience in meditation, it could be a breath practice where you have something that you're concentrating on. It could be focusing on a sacred name. It could be working with a certain kind of magnetism or energy, or practice with light, where our attention is now moving towards something that's going to take us in another direction that will enable us to make this connection in what we call the barzakh, the meeting place that we've talked about so many times throughout all these classes, where we can experience this connection between the two sides of ourselves, the manifest and the divine, or call it the transcendent. So that's where the imaginal faculty really comes to life. It's an essential ingredient to really get going, for that connection to be made.
Sounds good. So we have a choice, and can we call it sometimes the operating system of our soul, I guess, that we can make choices. And I think the whole spiritual path is about that, is making those choices. But the incredible effect of it and how much it really can accomplish is so much more than just therapy, bringing us back from difficult thoughts and places our minds are. So the regular kind of thinking that most people are engaged in can be taken up way many more notches than that into this condition that Azurbash was just speaking about, of recreating everything and making this moment under the very edges of what can be, the great excitement of all that. So the potential is just vast.
Yeah, and we have sayings like seeing things in a new light. Well, we can kind of unpack that a bit. And for that to happen, it's not just us receiving literally receiving the photons that are coming from what we're seeing, but we now know that we emit photons. Light is coming from our being, and it's the interchange of light that enables these experiences that we're talking about of Tao wheel and relational unity and harmonic perception, and really enables the creative imagination. So one way of looking at inspiration, let's say, is that, well, there's going to be something coming from a higher realm, and I want to just open and receive it. And so we feel like it's just coming down, and that's great. That certainly is a reality, and probably has happened to each of us maybe several times throughout our lives. But what we're proposing in this series is that's great, and there's more to it, more to the story than that, because when we're able to align our human side with that divine or transcendent side, now instead of just thinking of one way thing of something coming down, there's the circulation of the returning light and the descending light, and each side is transforming the other, and now something emerges from the light upon light that brings forth a new creation, which in Ibn Arabi's terminology is called himma, the creative power of the heart. But that can only happen through this alignment of the two sides. The imaginal faculty is an essential ingredient in this process, because without the imaginal faculty, we'll just be stuck in our usual way of thinking and perceiving. We won't be able to realize the other levels on which we exist, much less be able to establish a circulation between those levels, or to be able to bring forth something that comes from the transformed desire of our being.
I have something to share in regard to, this was, I think this is from Pure Vilayat, I'm not positive, might have been Hazar Inayat Khan. Anyway, a very good source. The best of all arts is the art of personality. In the making of personality, it is God who completes his divine art. And I guess I would say, since you've been speaking about this in concert with those beings who are in manifestation, with this, when he's speaking about personality, he's speaking about our way of thinking. He's speaking about our way of doing and how we are with each other. And it is beautiful work that we are in. And you have a practice for us too, don't you?
Well, let's see what's on the burner here. So just close your eyes and allow yourself to really become present. And perhaps there's thoughts going through your mind, and that's okay. Just let them go by. You don't have to identify with them or hold on to them. Just let them be like things floating by on the wind. The same with any emotions that may be present. See if you can open. Let your intention be to open to the essence of your being that's beyond thought, beyond emotion, but it's unique to you. It's the way divinity and the expression of divinity comes into your being through all of your experiences, inner or external, and the way that the divinity of your being shines forth through your way of relating to anything and everything that you are experiencing. So imagine you're like the sun. The sun doesn't have to sit there and go, well, I need to keep thinking about shining, so I'm going to shine light out. It's just that's the nature of the sun. And as Hazrat Anand Khan said, each of our souls is like a unique ray of light that comes from that divine central sun. Each of us is a miniature of divinity in existence, in manifestation. We have that same nature as the sun. That light comes forth. We don't have to push it or make it come forth, but it comes forth more and more as we open to that circulation that's always taking place from the transcendent to the manifest, from the manifest to the transcendent, from whatever station we're in to whatever extent we've awakened to our existence on many levels of reality and gradually come to experience a unitive sense of identity that incorporates all of these levels circulating. Can you imagine being in a state of the full reality of your being in which thoughts are no longer concepts or reactions, but thoughts bring forth the way divinity is expressed in your being and manifest as a reality. Your being is and always will be a living expression moving towards the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, which has no end. So instead of thinking about glorifying a divinity apart from the world that you're in, imagine that the living expression of your being in the world is a fulfillment of the divine glorification, ongoing. Lights upon lights upon lights. and allow this realization, this state of ongoing revelation to be felt and experienced all the way down to the very cells of your body, even to the molecules and atoms. Everywhere you look, you see the divine face. From the smallest subatomic particle to the vastness of the universe, to realms beyond space and time. Your soul encompasses all of that. And your soul began as, we could say, as a thought of God. And the magic and the mystery is that through your process of awakening, what began as a thought becomes a living embodiment of the divine being. And may we each shine forth that unique light of divinity that can only come through us as a gift to all of existence. Amen.
So we will continue, knowing that this is very precious time, this last half hour of our class time together in this series, and knowing that, you know, using our imaginal faculty, we have choices. There are so many things that could be communicated right now. I've chosen one thing which kind of looks back to our time with the creative brain, thinking about this part of us that without which we couldn't do a lot of this imaginal work. And I'd like you to share a little bit about the hardware and software idea.
Okay, so we can think of our brain as analogous to a computer. So let's say you've got a friend that works for Dell or Apple, and they give you, it's not on the market yet, they give you the prototype of the newest model, but they explain to you, well, the software has not yet been developed, but just look at this display and this keyboard and the sound quality and so on. And you might think, well, that's nice, but I really can't do much with this other than use it as a glorified paperweight because it doesn't have any software. It doesn't have an operating system. So our brain used to be thought, there was the notion of the tabula rasa, the blank slate, that we came into life with a blank slate. We know that's not the case anymore. There's much that is inherited through our DNA and so on. And much of the software, so to speak, of our brain develops naturally without any effort on our part. The ability to establish our senses and to recognize how to orient ourselves in space, and then gradually to develop a sense of identity and so on. But beyond that, it's kind of up to us and our experiences that determines how this hardware is wired. And what do I mean by wired? how the connections are made among different neuronal patterns in the brain. And some people, like it's been found that really great musicians have a lot more activity and more neurons in the part of the brain that has to do with sound and perception of sound, and artists may have more in the spatial part of the brain, and so on. But we can change those patterns. Many of them become deeply ingrained, as I talked about earlier, but that could still be changed. And sometimes that's done through a process of psychotherapy, but it can also be changed, as I think Ravani Ra is going to be talking about exposing ourselves to new kinds of experiences and so on, learning something new, and actually new connections and new circuits are gradually formed in the brain that enable us to be able to think in ways that we couldn't think before, do things that we wouldn't be able to do before. So we're actually modifying the programming of the brain. And Pir Vilayat would say that ultimately we can become capable of participating in the divine programming.
Very nice, beautifully done. So we had a few classes back, we talked about the creative brain, and that it was helpful to have many different types of experiences, many types of input. For example, maybe lots of different kinds of music and different art experiences. I'm a mixed media artist, so I like to do different types of things in my art. Being able to listen to many different people's points of view. There was a person in the movie that I watched, The Creative Brain, who said that he was almost always making terrible mistakes in what he was doing. And then he thought about it a little and said, because I'm trying new things all the time. So that's a wonderful thing, to be making some mistakes quite a bit of the time if you are trying many new things. And this all stimulates the brain. And we talked about Magnus Carlsen, the great chess player, and Ramanujan, who was a mathematician that came up with things that no one had ever thought about doing in math before. And I thought, well, what about our son, Orion, who is a scientist that has been valued in terms of very flexible thinking and being able to think of things that no one had ever thought before and then researched them. And I thought, so I interviewed him in this last week. And it was really wonderful to hear some of these things, and I'm going to share them with you. Because one of the things he talked about was the importance of cross-pollination between different fields. And see if you get a whiff of some things that you might have discovered in the spiritual realm through what he's been working with, what he calls the art of science. I never had heard this term that he had been researching this, but he does call it the art of science, and is really about things like choosing the question to investigate, that's an important part of it, is to ask the right question as you begin. But listen to the rest of these things and see what you think. He said it's important to look at the interfaces, the boundaries of the known and the unknown. And he also, about interfaces, he said, examine, like I said, the cross-pollination of one system with the other. And he said, if you do, there are infinite interfaces among them all. Then he said, it's important to think of things differently than you had before in your research. He's talking about how to do research and to explore different things. And he said, well, cells don't individually control where to move. They don't really have an operating system within themselves to decide this. So it was important for him then to think about it differently and investigate this, what he calls signaling cascades, where one thing influences another, leading to whole other currencies of forces at play. And a couple more for you. Another one was, I think this is Azarbash's favorite one, be willing to work in an area that no one knows about, comfortable with a situation of uncertainties, and wandering in an area where no one knows what's going on. the mystery. Put yourself in the mystery. I really didn't realize that he was doing that sort of thing. And then the last was keeping open to the possibilities. He was more specific about that. Instead of having a specific thing to look for in the research to see, oh, it's here or it's not here, then you really position yourself in an area that's a blank space, get tools or techniques needed, and position yourself for something to happen. So I see some similarities.
No,
What about you?
I see a lot of similarities. And what did he say? He said that he and I must be related or something.
Yeah. Well, when yeah, because you said something about what you saw, and then you thought, well, we're related. 'Cause
Yeah.
these fields are related.
Well, and there's a concept I think I've just mentioned briefly before called a weak link in a network. And that doesn't mean like 98-pound weak link, but it means, let's say you want to find a new job and you just talk about your friends that are working in that field. Well, they're going to have some connections. But if you talk to someone that somebody introduces you to that you don't know very well, that maybe works in some other field, then they may have connections for you that you never would have even considered, that open up a job that's different from what you thought you were looking for, but perhaps way better than that. So, and it's also been found if you have, let's say, a problem you're trying to solve, so you get together, this would be the usual way in a think tank, you get the best experts in the field together. Well, they found that much better results are going to happen if you have at least one person in the group who knows little or nothing about what the topic is, but ask questions that the experts don't think to ask because they've been at it so long, they all see things in a similar way and they haven't looked at it through
Fresh eyes.
through a fresh perspective, and then maybe a real breakthrough happens. And so it is really important to open yourself up to things that are new sources of information and input, not just to accumulate a body of knowledge, but to expand the realm of what you can receive if something comes from that. So your filters are now not just limited to the basis of what you've known before, but now they've opened up to a whole other sphere.
Mm-hmm. Good. So I'd like to have you enter in with me to the practice with the words, the divine words that we used before, but looking at it in a different kind of way, and also a head movement that goes with them. Also, we have the English words that can be used without even using the other Arabic words, and focus on a little bit about the Lataif also. So first, let us begin with looking at the, I call them Sophianic affirmations. These are really the English translations of these divine words. And I'd like you to think of them in terms of that it's a compassionate witness is addressing you rather than you addressing the divine. It's a little bit different focus here. So they're looking, really kind of asking you to participate in this process. It's really the focus of the whole imaginal property, or the imaginal faculty. So here we go. So the first is, O human divine. In this one, we're focusing on the base of the spine that connects you with the earth. So it's the whole combination of the human plus the divine, the manifest and the transcendent. So when we say this part of the affirmation, we're concentrating on our base, our first chakra, and the connection with the earth. So why don't you say this after me? O human divine.
O human divine.
Thank you. And the next is, open the house. if you remember back to the study in Zoroastrianism, this was an admonition from Spenta Our Mighty to open her house within ourselves. And I take that to mean is open that multidimensionality. Get beyond the truncated view of who you are and allow the opening to all the different realms. And beyond that, all the different aspects that you can imagine. Open the house. So please say, open the house.
Open the house.
When we think of this one, we will be going from the base chakra all the way. Well, actually, I'm going to stop you at the forehead. In the work that Pierre Zio is doing, when we focused on the third eye, he had us imagine blue, but it also was reaching up into the black of the crown chakra. It's like where the stars would be. So it was a beautiful kind of double way of seeing the third eye. The third eye is really opened out into eternity, but it's a little bit more related to your manifestation also. So think of open the house, thinking of your third eye. So open the house. You say it.
Open the house.
Thank you. All right. The next part of this practice is going to be to think about shine your unique light. We're going to just shorten that to shine your light. And this is revisiting the aspect that really in the studies, again, in the Zoroastrian tradition, we spoke of Svarna, the light of glory. And we've spoken before too about that we are light beings. If we begin to identify ourselves more as light, so much more makes sense. So much more is given to us than just thinking of the material part. So we are going to think about us shining our light so that we're realizing who it is that is this light being here, but it's also realizing our own process, our imaginal faculty, so that we're going to have a revolution kind of motion to this once I put it all together. But let's just say the words, shine your light.
Shine your light.
Thank you. And then the last part is that we'll be engaged fully in the new creation and knowing that our own unique being can bring a new dispensation, a new transformation of everything that there is, every moment that we are here, especially when we are identifying more with what we were just saying, the human divine that has the house opened into the multidimensionality, that can shine this unique light of our being, then that can create anew everything there is. So let's just use create anew. Would you say create anew?
Create anew.
Thank you. All right. So these are the words to be using, and these could be taught to other beings too that are not necessarily Sufis. They could use these in a meditation. Now let's look at the head movements that we could use with this. And I thank Azrabash for helping me put these together. We think about, as we drop our heads looking down, we think of the first chakra and our connection with the earth. We say, as your eyes are downward, say, "Oh, human divine, oh, human divine." And we look up, and through the third eye, we're looking through the third eye and looking up and saying, "Open the house." And then we're going to be rotating, as in the zikr, looking at your left shoulder, dropping the head, going all the way up to the top. And we say, "Shine your light, shine your light." And the last part, you drop your head just a bit, and think about your heart. You're facing forward, but your concentration is in your heart. And you feel your heart shining. And you say, create anew. So I'm going to say the whole thing, and then we can join in together. Look like this. O human divine, open the house. Shine your light. Create anew. So please do this with me. O human divine, open the house. Shine your light. Create anew. Again. O human divine, open the house. Shine your light. Create anew. One more time. O human divine, open the house. Shine your light. Create anew. And just close your eyes for a moment and feel the combination of all the dynamism. So let's discuss these ideas a little bit more, and then we'll use the divine names that go with them. This first idea is you're going to use the Yamawjud, Mawjud, Yamawjud, which means making God a reality. It is about God as manifest in the world. And of course, it's also referring to us as those beings that are manifest in the world, that carry the divine. So it is the idea of the human divine. It also is the feeling of this great possibility that we carry, that we are able to enter into the processes that we were speaking about earlier, Azarbash was bringing us into, and thinking about that is a reality for us. It is something that we are growing into, but it is us, it is our possibility as manifest beings. The second being, open the house, is Yafatah, Fattah, Fatah. This, by the way, is the word that Jesus used to heal the man that was deaf and dumb in Mark 7, 34th verse. I even found that for you so you could look. The word that is used in Mark is Ephatha, Ephphatha. Very unusual sound, but maybe this is somebody in another culture trying to write Fatah. But it was supposedly the same name, and it did also have the same meaning, to open. So this was said in healing, to open the ears and the mouth of this being that couldn't speak and couldn't hear. So it's wonderful to say the same word that Jesus said in healing. What a wonderful blessing. So this is the idea of opening the house, and it's opening our perception and our consciousness to realms beyond what we could perceive before. Here's the same idea of pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps. How can you make something happen, through ideation? This is the wonderful imaginal quality here, this imaginal faculty in action, being able to say it, Yafata, and somehow bring forth that possibility, that wisdom that we aren't experiencing at the moment. It's just the most amazing thing. Yafata. Then when we speak about the light, I spoke a little bit more already about the light of glory and also about the art of personality. It's also about the uniqueness of your own light. And repeating again that somehow the light upon a light creates something new that hasn't been before. It unveils things that had been there that we hadn't seen or had glimpses of before. In a hall experience, we had glimpses of it. And perhaps this is making it more of a makam experience, or an experience that will last and endure. And the word for this is going to be Ya Zahir, Zahir. And we did do these divine names before. And now we're giving them a little bit more grounding, more to work with. And also, hopefully, these 4 words will remind you of all that we've learned in these 6 weeks. And the more that you go back and maybe listen to the classes again or look at your notes, then these 4 aspects will come forward, perhaps. So the 4th one is create anew, and it's Ya Khaliq. It's spelled Khaliq, pronounced Khaliq. It's wonderful that we finish this whole practice in the heart. It's in the center, rather than thinking of the chakras all lined up and that we're trying to get up here into transcendence. No, we're not. We're trying to bring both sides together in the center, which is the heart. And to me, the sound Khaliq is beautiful. It has a little soft flowing sound at the beginning, and then the last part is like a very sharp little, and to me it reminds me of bells, reminds me of music. Khaliq. This means to create, but it also has this, to me it has the sound of, because it's happening in the heart, and we're trying to focus on the heart so that what is in our hearts, deepest in the hearts, can be manifest, can be expressed, can be part of the harmonizing of it all. So it's not forcing any one thing. It is, but it might be the one thing that's needed. This one little sound, like you're out in nature and you hear the sound of this one bird. I'm just thinking that's just made it exactly the most beautiful. Talk about perfecting the divine qualities. It's just perfecting those divine qualities with your little contribution, your little sound. So Khaliq, to me, sounds like little bells that ring in this moment. So we can say now and go through the head movements of what we were doing, and this time with the divine words. So the first one is going to be, as we have our head down, we say Ya Mawjud. As we look up, think of the third eye, looking through the third eye and upwards, Ya Fatah. As we circle the head, Ya Zahir. And then finally, as we allow the presence to be in the heart, shining outwards as our face looks straight ahead, Ya Khaliq. So I'll do this and then we can all join in the second time. Ya Mawjud. Ya Fatah, Ya Zahir, Ya Khalik. Okay, join me. Ya Mawjud, Ya Fatah, Ya Zahir, Ya Khalik. One more time. Ya Mawjud, Ya Fatah, Ya Zahir, Ya Khalik. Amen.